Hello, good morning, and welcome to our Tuesday live stream. Of course, it might be afternoon or evening. It might actually be even Wednesday morning if you're happen to be joining from Asia Pacific, but wherever you are in the world today, thanks for joining us here today. This is a weekly live stream we do to talk about transformation type stuff, business and digital transformation. We do this every Tuesday. It becomes part of our Transformation Ground Control podcast. So this is our live interview, sort of the centerpiece of the podcast, but then we polish it up and edit it and put it into our podcast later on. So you're getting to see how the sausage is made here, so to speak. So I'm excited for today's topic. As you know, if you watch this live stream or watch the podcast, you know that we cover anything related to digital and business transformation. So a lot of what we cover is related to strategy, the people, process, technology aspects of transformation. And we spent a lot of time talking about the people parts of transformation. But one thing we have not talked a lot about is organizational culture. We've sort of peppered it throughout other discussions, and I always tend to gravitate back toward that lens, if you will. But we've never devoted an entire episode or interview to that topic. So we thought it'd be a good sort of deep dive into something that's so vague and nebulous, but yet important. So what I wanted to do today, before I introduce my guest, first of all, if you're joining on live here on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook, be sure to drop in the chat box any questions you have along the way for my guest or I. We'll get to those questions as we go. So just ask away as we're talking here, and we'll jump into those questions. And secondly, if you don't mind to start, just drop in the chat box where you're joining us from today. We'd love to see where in the world you are today, just to understand where everyone's from, and we'll hopefully get some additional questions from you too. So let us know where you're joining from today. I know Jedd and myself, or my guest, who I'll introduce in a second, and myself are both in Colorado in the U.S. So love to hear where you all are from as well. So that being said, let's jump into the conversation here to talk about organizational culture. And what I thought I'd do is what I wanted to do, and the reason I wanted to invite Jedd to the show, and I'll have him introduce himself here in a second, is he's been on the show before talking about similar types of topics, but we've never jumped straight into the cultural component. We sort of danced around it, touched on it a little bit, but we didn't really dive into it in our last conversation. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity to bring Jedd onto the show to do this. And the other reason I like Jedd's perspective is he doesn't have the typical corporate culture mindset. He's seen cultural shifts in other maybe higher stakes environments, and I'll let him describe that himself. So I thought it'd be great to see what kind of lessons we could take from some of those higher stakes situations and apply it to our own corporate cultural, organizational cultural sorts of transitions and changes. So that all being said, I want to welcome Jedd Hafer to the show. Jedd, thanks for being back.
Eric, it's a great pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. So I guess before we jump into this whole concept of organizational culture and how it affects change and transformation, how it affects organizations in general, maybe tell us a little bit about your background. What do you do, and how did you get to this point in your career?
Sure. I'm always doing a few different things, which is it's cheaper than ADHD medications to just have a few different focuses.
It's a good way to look at it.
And so I have a company called Mission-Peace, and we're largely a training company focused on law enforcement and really authority figures who have to deal with difficult situations. So we've done security teams and just about any group of people who might have to deal with angry and possibly aggressive people. So there's a high premium on emotional intelligence and de-escalation in our trainings, and a lot of proactive things so that we can resolve some of those conflicts before they even start. And then I also work with a company called Irvin Education Consultants on social media. Scott Irvin, the man behind it, is known as the Kid Whisperer. He did not pick that name, but he's just really, really good with kids. And so people kind of gave him that name. And then, of course, it sticks on social media. But he's just masterful at helping organizations, in this case, mostly schools, change. And I've gotten to learn his process and watch what he does. And there's a lot of similarities between Love and Logic, my former job, where we would go in and do a lot of training and consulting for schools just to make them really more peaceful and calm places, better places for teachers to work and kids to learn. So hopefully, yeah, some of those lessons that I've brought from kind of the people side are relevant and interesting to your listeners.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm excited to sort of connect the dots here between some of these, um, I keep calling it higher stake situations where in some cases it could be life or death, is in the case of a police or authoritative figure.
Or
Or
in a school, it could be, do we get snacks or not, which is pretty high stakes.
right. Well, in all seriousness, though, development, education of a child, that many would view that as a higher stake situation than a corporate environment. So that's why I'm really fascinated or want to learn a little bit more about this to see, what the parallels are, maybe what some of the lessons are we could take away into the corporate world.
Yeah, just at the deepest level, it's helping human beings get along better. And that seems to just be the one thing that I'm really good at, and I really love doing it.
It sounds so simple, yet not many people can do it well. Not many
It is
organizations.
not easy.
Right. So I guess to start then, what, you think about organizational culture, whether you're talking about a police department, a school, or a corporation, there's this whole nebulous term that a lot of us don't fully understand, which is just culture. It's hard to touch and feel. You can't, sometimes you just feel it. Sometimes you can't see it or touch it. But how would you describe organizational culture, just sort of in its simplest terms?
I like to think of it as the weather that we can make. You can never, you probably wish you could control the weather. You can never really control it. In our organizations, I think I get to make, to a degree, I get to make the weather in my office, in our meetings, in our buildings, however it's going. Because we can be intentional, we can set some tones that just sort of hang in the air, set a tone of expectation that will hopefully just kind of hang in the air that says, this is how we do it. This is who we are, and this is how we do things, and can create, in positive terms, a wonderful sense of belonging, a wonderful sense of meaning in our work beyond just we're doing things. And when it's bad, as many of us have experienced, when the culture of an organization is bad, it can get really toxic and it can drag everybody down. And obviously, as human beings, human nature can kick in, and we can become pretty negative and pretty full of complainers. Even generally positive and productive people can get in that culture of complaining, and it seems to cycle and get worse. So I really like to think of it as, and we talk to teachers about this, in my classroom, I can make the weather. I can set the tone, I can set the expectations. And the more intentional I am and thoughtful about that, it's amazing. We can really have an impact. We never seem to be able to get the culture perfect. It'll always ebb and flow because it is somewhat like the weather. There's some elements that we can't control or predict. But it's wonderful if we can be more intentional. And that's what I really try to help people do, is be more intentional about setting the tone and being proactive about, how do I really want it to feel here? How do I want, if a new person came in, how would they view this organization? Pretty quickly, we make those judgments. We look around and say, oh, I can tell what kind of an organization this is. Based on the posters that this teacher hung up in her classroom, I can tell some things about how it's going to be here.
Right. Yeah, that's super interesting. I never thought of culture in that exact way, of just the weather that you create. So it sort of is something you can feel and in some cases touch, depending on the weather. But it sort of sets the context and the tone. It doesn't necessarily dictate or determine day-to-day outcomes, maybe not at that granular level, but the overall mood and feel and environment, whether you're gonna have a good day or a bad day, that sort of thing. That's a good way to frame it.
Yes, and as leaders, we have a little more control over those things than it will sometimes seem. Again, because of intentionality, people will get sick of hearing me say that word today, but it pulls us to greatness.
Right.
Intentionality, even in a de-escalation situation, if we're talking about a really angry person, a person who's trying to calm that person down, intentionality can win the day. There's even some science behind it. Our brains have these wonderful neurons called mirror neurons. And what they basically do is say, what's everybody else doing? And we make sure that we relatively match up. If you've ever had this in a meeting where somebody yawns and then other people start yawning, that's mirror neurons. Or it could be that I was talking, is the other possibility.
All right.
But mirror neurons cause our brains to say, okay, I need to kind of match what everyone else is doing. It's the same reason if you're talking really loud at a party and all of a sudden it gets quiet and you're the only one, and that feeling of embarrassment. Mirror neurons. So we use those in this case to our advantage. The intentional person can cause the person to pace where they're at unlike, I think last time I was on, we talked about the Jerry Springer effect, where people get louder and louder and less
Right.
and less in control. This goes the other way. The intentional person can bring that other person down. And it's not just about anger or escalation. Mirror neurons work in any group environment. So the person who's being intentional, and it might be about smiling or being more friendly or showing more interest in my coworkers, that intentional person can have an effect on everybody else, which is wonderful.
Right. Right. So it's so when you think about the culture, so we talked about the mirror neurons and sort of the weather that we can create. What are some of the specific dimensions of culture? Like if we were to unpack it a little bit more and describe it, what are some of those major components of culture?
I was thinking about this before talking to you, because I was thinking, what would be valuable, elements of an organizational culture with some of the organizations that you all work with. And I know you work with a wide variety. So I was trying to think just valuable traits. And I think the healthiest organizations, a big one we don't always think about, is curiosity. I want a culture of learning and growth and curiosity, that we all look around and we love learning, and we love learning new things. I think organizations can definitely we sometimes seek comfort as human beings. So we can get in that fixed mindset versus the growth mindset, where I want things to stay the same. I want them to stay comfortable and familiar, so that no new stuff comes into my little world and disrupts my comfort and my stability. So I think a healthy organization is kind of the opposite, where we're always looking around, not distracted from the important things, but just curious to always find out what's new. Is there a better way? Again, thinking in terms of growth and improvement. To me, regardless of the field, whether it be a school or a software company, that culture of curiosity and learning, super valuable, because we're always, just by definition, we're going to be getting better, and we're not going to get stuck in some of the old ways, especially the ones that are maybe less productive or less healthy.
Right. Yeah.
I got a couple more. A culture of high expectations. And this is another thing that working with a lot of schools. I've been in schools now in all but 5 states, either 4 or 5 states I haven't been to, training and consulting with teachers and educators. A culture of high expectations is amazing in terms of what it can do. People tend to, and I see this especially with kids, they tend to rise or fall to the level of expectations. And they never rise to low expectations. It's weird how that works out.
Right.
But I've seen so many wonderful educators who have kids performing at this level and achieving at this level that other people would say that's not even possible. Not that long ago, we were at a school in Ohio, and Scott Irvin, the guy I work with, the kid whisperer, was talking about, we're going to have the hallways completely quiet. This is an elementary school. Some of these kids are pretty easily distracted. They had kids that were on the autism spectrum, so a lot of noise makes it real tough for some of those kids to learn. And he said, well, we'll have quiet hallways in this school. And it was a group of teachers' aides that we were training. One of them said, that is impossible. We will never have kindergartners quiet in the hallway. And right on cue, this group of kindergartners, it was the class of Mr. Bates, a wonderful kindergarten teacher. They walked by perfectly silent, just this like perfect little row of ducks. They had been to the library, so they're all hugging their little library books that they had, and 100%. I don't mean kind of quiet. They were 100% silent in a perfect row, walked by on cue, and Scott just kind of went. And this person wasn't. It's not like they had never been around kids. This person just had probably fallen down into this level of expectation of it's just not possible. I think healthy organizations, especially from the leadership, there's just a culture of really high expectations, meaning we're going to do great work here, whatever it is. And not because we're desperate and we have to meet these margins or we're going to go out of business. It's not that level of high expectation. This is just who we are.
Right.
To me, those are some of the best organizations. One more thought on that is, again, the high expectations don't come because, if we don't do this, we're screwed. It's not that kind of thinking. This is who we are, and it translates into beyond just our work. So a culture of service to others. We just celebrated Martin Luther King Day. And one of the great things that he said, of so many, but one of them he said, is anybody can be great because anybody can serve. And if you want to be great, you're serving other people. So that culture of service to others, it might be another underrated one. Organizations don't necessarily think about this, but I think because we're human beings and we're being good to each other, it affects our overall self-concept. That's another way to think about the culture, is our overall self-esteem or self-concept. And so how we view ourselves, well, if I'm always helping people and I'm doing great stuff in service to my fellow humans, I start feeling pretty good about that. I feel good about myself and us as an organization. This is just who we are. We serve, we do great things for other people. So I could give you a million more, but those are three that I tried to pick. People don't always think about. I think high expectations, probably a lot of leaders would say, oh yeah, I do that. I set a culture of high expectations. Right. But I don't know. Not every organization I deal with are these front of mind sort of things.
Yeah. And that's why I asked the question, because I think a lot of times people think, well, culture, I mean, what is that? I mean, it's not the weather I can control. The weather just happens, right? I think that's the way a lot of people approach culture. So I think this is interesting to sort of unpack it a bit more.
Especially if we're not being very intentional about it. If we're not thinking about it, then it does seem to just sort of happen and fall on our heads without us knowing what's going on.
Yeah, and I can speak from experience just in my last company before I started Third Stage. Ironically, even though I have always done change management types of consulting, I did not focus on the internal culture of the company. I just sort of let it happen, right? I didn't mean anything good or bad by it. I just thought it'll just, people will just sort of, march into line and what I expect or whatever. And so you just hire a bunch of people without thinking about culture, about how you want to shape it. And it just sort of morphs into something other than what you wanted it to be. And usually when it morphs into something you don't want it to be, it's almost like gravity. It's going to pull you down to something you don't want it to be. It's not, I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I can't imagine an organization just magically just stumbling into a great culture without that intentionality that you're talking about. I don't think that's possible.
Yeah, you don't see that. I mean, there's certainly organizations that just have a lot of great people. Yeah. And so the culture isn't something they have to work as hard on. But because we're always going to be human beings and we're all flawed and have our issues. Some of us, I have more issues than National Geographic myself. Yeah, like you said, if I'm not working on it, it's probably going to slide. Just like a lot of our habits, just as interpersonal habits. If I'm not being intentional and working on those things, they're going to slide down and not in a good direction. Gravity, it is. That's a good analogy, because that's going to pull you down if you're not working on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to get to a couple of questions here from the audience, and thanks to everyone who's joining from really all over the world. We have, for example, we've got someone from Pakistan. Looks like we have someone from Qatar, Toronto, where apparently it's snowing. So speaking of weather, there's some weather happening there in Toronto. Thanks to Jihad for joining from Istanbul. And then also we have, just as another example, Lorene from Montreal joining here as well. So thanks to everyone for joining here today. So quick question here. Well, I blocked some spam that's coming through on YouTube. I have to manually block that stuff as it comes through. But here's a great question that I'd be curious to get your take on, Jedd. A lot of what you just described is sort of like the aspirational culture, I'd say, the curiosity of learning, or curiosity and learning, high expectation, service to others, et cetera. That's sort of a great definition for what potentially makes a great culture. But when you're talking about changing a culture, I recognize that I don't have those traits, or maybe other traits that I'm looking for or would like to see in my organization. How do you approach, how do you get a broader team to induce the change? Because these people are the ones who make it easy or hard to overachieve change and excellence. So I guess it's just a broader question. How do you get people in leadership within the organization to recognize that, you need to change, and how do you get them to change? What are your thoughts?
Well, hopefully I don't get hate mail for saying this, but I actually love meetings where I don't love meetings just for meeting's sake. Nobody does, but I love meetings where we get people together and get them excited about things. And so I would recommend, and we do this at schools, let's get everyone together and agree on things that are important to us, core values, and what our real mission is. And typically that's something you can watch people get pretty excited about, and let it be a wide open discussion where we can talk in those excited terms and say, wow, this is who we are. Again, in a school, one of the ones that will come up, because we'll give some examples or some suggestions, but we preserve the dignity of every single kid. And, any good educator is going to get fired up about that as a core value, because they're like, yes, and they've seen those instances where we didn't preserve the dignity of the kid, and it's not good. So that's one thing I really recommend, is some kind of exercise. I mean, a lot of this is modeled from the leaders, but in that exercise, hopefully it's not just the leaders sort of signing on and saying, this is who we are. We haven't done this before, but we're going to do some service things. We're going to go out and find people that we can do something for, maybe some people in need, and has nothing to do with our product, but we're going to just do it because that's who we are. We're people who care about others. And so, kind of this mixture of leading by example and modeling, but also bringing people in. And we will literally a lot of times have everyone physically signs this document and says, this is what we agree to. And for those who are leaders listening, the good news is we can use that later. And I so much rather use this to hold somebody accountable. All right. So in a school, you were screaming at that kid. Can you tell me, we all agreed we're going to preserve the dignity of our students. Can you tell me how screaming at that kid was preserving the dignity? And it just, as human beings, we don't want to be incongruent with our values.
Right.
And so that's, to me, such a better way to hold somebody accountable to the values that they agreed to versus, I caught you breaking this rule and there's this check mark or whatever. I don't like to be held accountable that way. But when someone who I respect says, hey, does that line up with what you really believe and what your values are? It's pretty convicting. And so I think it has a twofold benefit. We get everyone excited up front saying this is who we are. And then later, if you want to me, it's just a more effective way of doing it. I realize we have to formalize it in some cases, but to be able to say, I'm going to use this value as the tool to hold you accountable rather than the rule.
Right.
And again, I'm not against rules, but I think for me, that's just more effective. I'd much rather be challenged that way than, I may or may not think the rule has a really good reason to exist.
Right.
But if I physically signed a piece of paper that says, this is a value, this is what I believe, pretty hard for me to not feel some at least self-accountability there.
Right. Now I think you've answered this in passing, throughout the discussion here, but maybe I'll ask it anyway, and we can directly tackle this question, which is, why is culture so important to organizational performance and success?
Because we're individuals. Ultimately, we make our choices as individual human beings. So my first real job, one of my first real jobs, I always had several, but one of my first real jobs was a fast food place. And I went in, I got trained by the manager, who was a high expectation, do everything the right way person. And she said, this is how we do fries. And she trained me on that way. And, it's the first thing you learn. And I was like, okay, I know how to do fries. Pretty simple. She left, and my fellow employees came around and they said, let us show you the easier way. The way she showed you was fine, but actually there's some unnecessary steps there that don't really accomplish anything. This is a little shortcut. This is the easier way to do it. This is how we do it. And I remember being in that immediate dilemma of, oh no, what I was told does not match what I'm experiencing. And there was almost a panic feeling. And I know you're on the edge of your seats. And so, yes, I did it the right way, which immediately caused in the culture, you get those kind of like, teacher's pet, kiss up.
So the way you were doing it from the person that left, that was the right way, not the way the other people.
Yeah, I did it the right way. And then my coworkers instantly. So that's a long way of saying if there's negativity in the culture, it puts that individual, any individual who encounters that, oh, we complain here. Okay, I'm gonna, I at least have the temptation to follow along with that. Oh, we take shortcuts here. Okay, I have the temptation to follow along with that. If nothing else, maybe I don't. My coworkers are probably not going to have sat down and say, "Oh, we're really going to work on a culture of high expectations here," and try to influence me that way, like the leaders would. And so it's sort of what you said before. If I'm not addressing it and really trying to do these proactive things to make it positive, it's probably going to slide down to some level into negativity. And I think we talked about last time, the most common, I think, is just complaining. We're all much beset and put upon and oppressed and victimized. Oh, it's so hard. And that's the beginning. When I stop appreciating, wow, this is an awesome thing that I get to do with these awesome people I get to work with, and I start finding myself complaining about it. The unfortunate thing about that is my brain hears that. And my brain hears this sort of unquestioned, because as much as we can filter out other things, it's hard to filter out our own voice. This is why things like affirmations work, right? So I hear my own voice joining in this chorus of complaining, and pretty soon, oh, this is a terrible place. Negativity can just be so contagious. And I think that's why we have to be on top of this, trying to keep the culture healthy, because it's just like the human body. If I'm not working on keeping my body healthy, some unhealthy stuff is going to start happening.
Yeah.
And,
you're
and
not
then
just
it can just be
medically
the
healthy.
death of an organization.
Yeah. So speaking of that, do you have examples of that you've seen in your career, or maybe one in particular that stands out, of situations where you saw culture drag the company down?
Yeah, I worked for a nonprofit that helped kids that were in trouble for many years. And by definition, I mean, we paid, the pay was terrible. And one of the beliefs was, well, that will filter out anybody who might be here for the wrong reasons, right? If they're here for the money, they're not gonna stay. Go do something that's much easier that also pays better, because it was a hard job and it also paid poorly.
Right.
So we tended to get really good people with great hearts, or we'd get kind of the other end of the spectrum. They're here because they couldn't get any other job, or they're desperate, or some other, less positive motivator that brought them in. And so that culture was always a tug of war between the true believer, I would do anything to help these kids, and I really believe in their success, super positive people on one side, and pretty negative, pretty toxic people on the other side. And I could sometimes watch it. It was almost like watching a tug of war. And unfortunately, yeah, there were times, always ebbed and flowed, never was perfect, never was so bad that we couldn't take good care of the kids. But I watched it at times be the flag got pulled too far in this bad direction, and it was really harmful, especially to the good employees. And I hate to, sound like I was judging everybody, but you have your employees who really care, and the kids could tell very quickly who really cares and who's just doing this because it's a job or whatever. I think that's true in a lot of fields. Those people who didn't really care could actually have a pretty big impact on the people who were there for the right reasons and did really care. And it was never all or nothing, but you could really see that ebb and flow, and sometimes it could be pretty destructive. I think we lost some really good people because they would say, I just can't be around these people who are so negative all the time.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And you alluded in that example there, and also the French fry example, making the French fries, you sort of alluded to this thought that, if you have someone up above, a leader within the organization, that whether they're deliberately doing or not, they're having some sort of impact on shaping the culture. In the case of the French fries, it sounds like someone who was above you sort of affirmed that you were doing it the right way, and the other people that were telling you to do it a different way were wrong, or that wasn't the way the company wanted you to be doing it. It sounds like, so leadership and management, how does that all fit in, or have you seen that affect a culture as well?
Yeah, I think I need to remember as a leader, I ought to be giving people some whys. It's another reason to do this kind of who we are, core values, what are we excited about in our mission. exercise and getting everybody to agree and kind of sign off on it. For most people without a why, it's pretty easy to slide down, again, in a bad direction. Of whether I've worked with people who quit smoking, for instance. They went to the doctor and they see this really scary picture of their lung and they say, "You love your kids, right? Okay." And now all of a sudden I have this super powerful why. If I have a really powerful why, I'm going to do those things that I need to do. As a leader, I've got to be giving my people the strong why, so that, and it can't just be making money. It can't just be so that you individually make money or that we as a company make money. It's got to be something more than that. That to me, I think, is the best protector against the French fry scenario. If those fellow employees all understood, oh, there is a good reason to do it the right way, and we care about that reason, then they're probably less prone to take those shortcuts. So I think that's what a leader can do to kind of guard against bad culture creep. I don't know if we just invented a term. the creeping in of the sort of contagious among the employees, negative stuff. If we all are, at least to some degree, focused on the good reason why, the good rationales for why we do things this way, the right way, I think that helps insulate us from some of that.
So in your example of the schools and I'll maybe generalize a little bit more and say, nonprofits or any organization where employees have a higher sense of meaning or purpose, beyond just a paycheck, beyond just a job. Let's assume it's an organization like that, whether it's a school or nonprofit or whatever. How is it then that you get a bunch of good people that mean well, that have a sense of purpose? How could an organization like that possibly have that what you call it, culture creep? The culture creep. How could you possibly have that if we all mean well, we're all good intentioned, we're all trying to do the right thing? How could a culture possibly become toxic in that sort of environment?
I think it's because we're human beings with free will, and we can get our feelings hurt. I would say in the more positive organizations, and I'd probably make the case that every organization either is or should be, or at least has the potential to be like that what we do, there's a higher calling and a higher purpose to it, even if it just looks like, oh, logistically we're just making these widgets. No, the healthiest and best organizations that I know, they still have a sense of mission, that we're going to add value to people's lives. We're going to improve. We're going to make the world a better place. I don't think that's limited to just, I started in the nonprofit world and then sort of moved into a lot of education organizations. But I've seen companies that you wouldn't necessarily off the top of your head say, oh, that's a super benevolent organization, but then they are. In some cases, they're doing some of the most good in the world, even if it's just generosity. And I know you know this, but because I have seen, again, organizations full of good people, I think the interpersonal conflict, that thin-skinnedness that we can have, or we get our feelings hurt, truly sometimes we're like little kids, and like so-and-so got positive attention for doing that thing, and I'm over here going, what about me?
Right.
Just again, that we're human beings. I think it's certainly possible. If you could probably see this in a family, absolutely wonderful people, loving people, and they don't talk to each other.
Right.
They hate each other. They got in a fight at Thanksgiving a few years ago, and they don't talk anymore. You're like, how is that even possible? Because they're both the nicest people. Of course, that can happen in an organization. Again, I think the prevention for that is partly just the awareness that we always need to be working on and cognizant of this kind of nebulous in the air thing that is the culture. I'm not necessarily a fan of forced team stuff that causes a lot of people to roll their eyes. And I was one of those eye rollers when bosses said, we're going to do this thing. That said, I think healthy organizations, they're always putting out things that help us just get along with each other and appreciate one another better as human beings. There's another one we could add, in appreciation. Appreciation is often an antidote for that infighting and negativity that can creep in, even between two good people or two good departments. I bet you've seen this. This is a great department. full of really good individuals that do great work. This is a great department full of good individuals that do great. Because of some dynamic, they get at odds and they don't handle that conflict or that disagreement well. I know last time I was on, we talked about kind of modeling as the leader, handling being disagreed with in a real healthy way. That's really good for my people to see. But I think sometimes it's just that little seed of division, and all of a sudden, even really nice people can be at each other's throats. At least in my family, that's the way it goes.
You know, that's interesting you say that, because one of the common phenomena we see in any organization, whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, government, public sector, whatever, or education, you see these organizations where they have people that mean well. They want to support the overall vision of the company. They might believe in the change that they're going through as an organization, whether it's a digital transformation or org restructure, whatever the case may be. But yet, and so you get this mindset, sort of a false sense of security that this change isn't going to be that difficult. Our team's on board, and they're willing to go through the hard work to make the change. But then you made the point about your feelings getting hurt along the way. And then you start to realize, as a human, you're taking away some of my responsibilities, or you're changing my job, you're somehow disrupting my world, and my feelings are hurt. And now it starts to undermine my commitment or my excitement about this change initiative we're going through. So even in the best intentioned organizations, if you don't mitigate that, that stuff sorts to seep to the surface over time. And I think a lot of executives fail to see that in organizations.
And if I'm working with that company, I really would try to zero in on what's causing fear and anxiety, because fear and anxiety kind of sends us to the dumber parts of our brain, just like anger does.
Right.
And of course, if there's change, I'm going to feel some trepidation, some anxiety. So doing a good job, and this is one of the things I know you do, organization does a good job up front and proactively of helping mitigate some of that fear and anxiety, and letting people know it is going to be change, but it's also going to be okay. And on the other end of it, things are going to be better. We're going to be better. Again, easy to say, but sometimes it's hard to alleviate those fears for people. So that's what I look for, is during a change, is the fear causing individuals to behave in ways that they wouldn't normally, and how can we help them with that fear and the unpredictable, the unknown. If people, I always think about people's top fears. The unknown is often out there because we don't know what it is. And then another one that comes up a lot is public speaking. If you think about that, and doing a lot of public speaking, I enjoy it immensely. And I've thought, why is that such a great fear? And I realized I don't think it's even public speaking. I think it's public embarrassment that people are really afraid of. And so that's just a scenario that they imagine that would be really embarrassing. I imagine having to sing karaoke and there's no alcohol. It's not even karaoke at that point. But yeah, if I had to sing in front of a bunch of people, that would be the scary scenario for me. So I don't think it's really public. I think it's public embarrassment. And the relevance here is, in my organization, maybe right now I'm perceived as someone who knows what the heck they're doing, right? I do a good job. I'm perceived as competent. And we see this with kids in school a lot. I have this sense of how competent I am. I have a self-concept based on, am I good at this or am I not? I've been doing this thing and now I feel like I'm pretty good at it. And now you are going to ask me to do this new thing. And a huge fear that we don't always think about is, I'm going to look like a fool in front of these people who have historically, I feel like I've earned their respect and they see me as a capable person. So you just asked me to go from doing something I feel good about to something I'm scared to do. And in some sense, it's going to be in front of, because the results are, they're going to be put out there in front of my peers. Well, that's the very thing that some kids, their worst nightmare is having to go up and solve a problem, up on the board in front of the class. Sometimes as an organization, that's kind of what we're doing. And in many cases, we're doing it to our best people. Oh, yeah. You're the really capable person. We'll give you this new task. You'll be great at it. And we don't think enough about how scary that might be for that person. So yeah, I think the short answer of what to look for when people are maybe not behaving the way we hoped during a change is what's scaring them, what's hurting them, or what's scaring them, or what in the past has hurt or scared them that this is reminiscent of. Because again, as human beings, our body keeps this score of past hurts, and it's why maybe you and I might have a team that we love and they get a lead and we go, oh no, they're going to blow this lead. I've seen this before. It's seriously, if it's reminiscent of something that I went through before, and that's another thing we're up against. Some people have been in an organization that wasn't super healthy before, and they're going, oh no, here we go again. I've seen this before. We're going to turn on each other, and some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, what about, speaking of turning on each other, here's a question from someone over on Twitch. So I'm glad to see that we have people watching on the Twitch stream.
Some people my age don't even know what that is, Twitch.
I don't know what it is. I never used it. But, I do have an account on there that
I have kids, so I know what it is.
Yeah, I suppose I know what it is, but I don't use it very often. But question here is a great one, which sort of alludes or maybe builds on or takes a different direction from what you were just saying, Jedd, which is, if every organization is just made out of people who care about the mission, where should society have people who are universally malicious and negative? So, or maybe I'll just simplify that a little bit more. What do you do as an organization if you just steer clear of malicious and negative people? Are people really negative and malicious? Are they negative and malicious in certain environments? Or what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, this gets into kind of a big philosophical question. Let me start at the small level, at the micro level. My organization, I've had to do cost benefit analysis before, and once in a while, I've always said up front, give me the good person, give me the nice person, give me the person who wants to learn, and I'll take that person over the super skilled person, within reason, because I can probably train this person, especially if they have the right attitude. And at some point they'll catch up and be more valuable than the super skilled person. I've also been in organizations where a person had a really specific and valuable skill, and it was a chicken or the egg. Like, did they become this way because they're somewhat irreplaceable, and so they got this attitude, or are they that way and then they just happen to have this skill, and now again, one sort of feeds the other. Always, as a leader, you're going to do some cost benefit analysis, but the organization I was in for the longest, we started out kind of erring on the side of, oh, that person's too valuable. We basically have to let them get away with being sneaky to everybody else, and we basically have to let them get away with ignoring rules that everyone else is expected to follow. This was not personally my decision, but the administrative team. And at one point we had a huge turnover at the administrative team, and the new leader came in and said, no, we're not doing that. I'll find somebody. There's, the world is a big place. There's a lot of people. And there was much more of a propensity to jettison the toxic person. And it was remarkable. Well, one of the most telling examples I can think of is we almost immediately replaced that irreplaceable negative person with somebody who became so valuable because they were exact opposite end of the spectrum, super kind and loving and really generous heart and just good person toward the rest of the organization. And then we were looking back going, I can't believe we put up with that negative person for years and years. So on the micro level, I would say as an organization, again, within reason, probably better to err on the side of saying, this is just not a good fit for that person. If they're really, I want to have some compassion and say, maybe are they going through something? Experienced this recently, person that I perceived as, well, this person's just super negative. Found out what they were going through and changed a lot of my attitude of, wow, if I was going through that, I don't know that I would be behaving even as well as they are. At the same time, I think sometimes as leaders, we have to go, this person is too destructive to our culture, too toxic to their fellow employees, and they just have to go. On the broader level of society, I've been working with kids for a really long time, and I'm definitely a hopeful person that people can change. There's good brain research on this now about neuroplasticity. A guy named Dr. Daniel Amen, I'm a big fan of his stuff, has come out with all these brain scans and said, we used to say, oh, you got brain damage, there's nothing we can do, or the brain can't change. He came along and said, I've seen more brain scans than any person in human history. And yeah, there is a such thing as neuroplasticity. The brain can change, people can change. So yeah, I believe in hope, and I believe in people changing. That doesn't mean I'm going to hold on to a person who's dragging my organization down and down and down. We could get into a whole other discussion about prisons.
Right.
To me, I don't think anybody gets better in prison, but the nice thing about it is they're not hurting anybody else while they're there. And so if I start thinking about, oh, is this making that person better? The answer is often no. But same thing as if we suspend a kid from a school. Well, that kid didn't learn anything while he was suspended from school. Yeah, but he also didn't hurt any of the other students here at the school while he was gone. So that's the calculus that we're doing, right? Is it doing more harm for everyone else? And if so, I'd rather, my compassion has to extend to the rest of my people too. And if this person's really, really harmful to the rest of the people, I got to think about them too.
Right. Now, what about, here's an interesting question. It's actually a different spin on a question that I was going to ask you, but I like the spin better, although I am going to shorten it a bit, truncate the question here a bit. But I'll try to paraphrase it a bit, because it actually won't show the whole question here because it is a bit longer. But general question is, to go through a cultural shift. Let's just say I'm part of an organization where there are some cultural warts or things I want to improve or fix or change over time. But I've got some short-term profit goals and incentives I need to hit, and that's going to take a certain amount of my time, and that might be my short-term priority. How do I balance those shorter-term, short-sighted, profit motive-driven things versus something that is a longer-term potential advantage on the cultural side? How do you find that balance, or how do you encourage or convince people that they need to go through that change?
I've been in that exact situation where, as like a middle management, I'm saying to the bosses who control and then look closely at the money side, trust me, please let me hire this good person. Please let me create this position that we need. Please let me incentivize this really good person to stay. I promise you it'll pay off in the long run. I've been that guy. And I would say most of the time I was right. I was able to, in the long run, say, see, I told you, thank you for trusting me. Obviously, I don't want to see a company go out of business because on the front end, the cost of doing this stuff is just too much. But I really do believe if we think longer term and we think bigger picture, which is happening less and less in our world. You see stats on how quickly people will leave a job versus, our parents' generation, they'd stay in the same organization for 40 years or whatever. And now it's more like 40 minutes sometimes.
Right.
Because a lot more people are doing things digitally and remotely. It's just the loyalty of that part of the culture, that loyalty, we're all in this together, is lessened. But at the same time, as a leader, I've almost never regretted the front end investment. And I would say, and I was reading the question, it's kind of small letters, but I was reading it as you were reading. That investment is usually about the time and the energy and the prioritization that the leader is doing than it is necessarily this huge financial commitment. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much money the average organization that you work with is spending on culture. If it's like the donut the donut fund and the once a year retreat, or I don't know what people are doing. I know that to me the biggest investment comes from that leader going around and making contact with people and checking in and intentionally modeling some of these things that we've talked about. It doesn't really cost anything. Yeah, it costs your time, but you're gonna spend that time doing something. So especially if it's not a hard investment, I think
Yeah.
it's super easy to justify. Yeah, if all of a sudden I'm going into the red doing some of this stuff, certainly I got to look at that. But as the person who's been in the really tough position of the middle, kind of pulling from both sides of it, I have mostly had really good long-term results. I remember a couple people in particular, we just had to come up with more to keep them because they were so good. And my boss later was like, wow, that was a really, really good decision, because I see how incredibly valuable they are. And there's a small number of people in the world who would be that valuable in that role.
Right. Well, it almost, it brings me back to the first analogy, or one of the first analogies you brought up here today, which is creating the weather. It's like if your journey is to go towards success, profitability, whatever your short-term goal might be, you've got the short-term, short-sighted goal. Do you want to do it in a blizzard and a snowstorm with ice and dangerous conditions, or would you rather do it on a beach where it's sunny and warm and not too hot? And so it's sort of like you're setting the backdrop for what your journey towards those short-term goals are going to be. And so it seems like
if you've got those people who are just sunshine, you gotta take good care of them, and then you should also be one of those people. If you're the person who's charged with keeping the culture positive, that means I sometimes have to remember I like people, but sometimes I have to remind my face that I like people.
Right.
I need to be that person who's going around and being sunshine.
Yeah. So if I have an organization that's not sunshine, but I want it to be, or I want it to be better in whatever those aspirations might be, why is it so hard to change culture? Why don't more organizations do it? Why aren't more organizations successful at it? Why is it so hard?
I think sometimes you need an outside perspective at the risk of sounding self-serving and third stage serving.
It's okay. I'll let it slide.
But in the olden days, when they were on ships, they needed to have, some fixed point that they could. You can't tell where you're going unless it's by comparison with something else. And I think sometimes that's what the outside perspective gives you, is it's hard to tell accurately your culture or where you're drifting without some either way to measure it or way to view it that's just beyond yourself. Again, as human beings, we all have our known self, right? Our own self-awareness of who we are and what we think we look like, what we think we sound like. An outside perspective. I mean, this is why coaches think even Michael Jordan had a coach, and he didn't have a coach for the team, but he also had a personal coach working with him. I just watched a little documentary about Dirk Nowitzki, who was a phenomenal basketball player. His entire career had someone working intensely with him one-on-one, and he could have just said, hey, I'm one of the best in the world, I'm going to do my thing. So having that other perspective, that outside view of how we're doing, I think is super important. That's one of the easy things I'd recommend, is get some perspective that's outside of your organization, because you're never quite accurate with how we're doing if you don't have something outside of your ship that you can use to measure that a little bit. And then I'll go back to intentionality wins the day, and intentionality pulls us to greatness. So if it's my company and I just set this goal, we are going to be this way, and I'm going to bring in and draw in people who also see that as an important goal. The nice thing about Mirror Neurons is the good stuff is contagious too. Mm-hmm. Those things that we do intentionally, it's pretty neat to see, and I get to see this in schools a lot. This teacher has established this procedure or this habit, and all the kids are doing it. Pretty soon you look down the hall and the other groups of kids are doing it too. And that good stuff being contagious is really fun to watch, and it helps you get momentum. And then you can look back and say, look where we were, look how many great improvements we've made. Right.
Well, this is good. So maybe just as a sort of a capstone question to tie this all together, I think you've done a really good job of explaining what culture is and what it means, how to change it, how to be deliberate about it, the intentionality behind it, all that stuff. But what if I get the general concepts, but now I kind of step back and look at my own organization and I'm thinking about culture and I don't really know where to start. Is it a good, I don't even know if maybe I don't have a good understanding. Is it an effective culture, ineffective culture? Do I need to change it? How do I change it? I don't even know I don't know where to start. So what do you recommend to a team or to an organization that might just be now starting to think about culture for the first time?
A super easy thing that you can do, and some organizations will have an HR department that has tools for this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't, there are ways to send out anonymous surveys or requests for feedback. And I like an initial round. I mean, both all information can be valuable information. Someone tells you, your feet stink. You're like, okay, that's valuable information. I can do something with that. So the first round is an anonymous round in a sense of we put out a way for people to give us this feedback. We're soliciting it. It's safe. They feel safe in being really honest. There will come around where we want the more specific and we want to know the source and dig into it a little bit more. But I mean, the easiest thing in the world to be, set up, and you probably have 10 different tools that you might recommend, but I'm picturing some kind of a survey that people fill out and we assure them, and it's because it's true. We're just going to get the overall feedback, and it's safe for you to be truthful.
Right.
That's an easy thing to do. And I'd keep it short but to the important information that you're trying to solicit. Just that step alone, some organizations are surprised in either direction. They're surprised how happy and feeling good about the organization people are, or the other way. And if they knew whose answers were whose, they'd probably be even more surprised. But then that next level of evaluation of our organization, again, something I know that you help companies do. And to me, that is fun stuff. It's not always easy, and sometimes it can be unpleasant, but just like our own, in our own lives, we become more self-aware. We're probably going to have better luck making the changes that we need to make. If I just never look in the mirror or
Right.
I never do anything to check on how I'm doing, I probably am going to lose sight of some things. It doesn't mean I need to be obsessed. And organizations can do this too. They can go too far the other way and just get absolutely obsessed with feedback. And they're always looking in the mirror so much that they don't do other things as much as they should. But that's a good first step is an honest. And the reason I say start with the anonymous is it gives people, it kind of opens the door to. There's only one reason in the world I would ask that question and let you answer it anonymously. I really do want the answer.
Right.
So it's a sincere move on the part of the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're right that assessing and having that objective view of your culture, the strengths and the weaknesses, and then stepping back and looking at, is that what we intended? Is that what we want? Is that what's best for us to achieve whatever our longer term goals are? And then figuring out, almost like the dials, on a control board, you're sort of tweaking the culture the way you want it in certain dimensions, whether it's a lot of the things you mentioned, the level of curiosity or the level of expectations, accountability, whatever it is. I mean, every culture has their own way of defining it, but you sort of have to define what you are today, what you want to be, and then ultimately how to transition that culture over time.
And just understand that you'll never get those dials quite perfect. You'll always be adjusting them. That frustrates some people, but that's the journey of life. We never really quite arrive.
That's how I am with my sound system at home. I can never get it exactly how I want, or the song changes and then I have to change it again because it doesn't sound quite right to me. So it's a good way.
But you can get it pretty darn good.
You can, and I'm thinking about it. I guess that's the key. Is if you're thinking about it, you're focused on it, you're consciously aware. I think that intentionality that you talked about early on is super important because it's deliberate. I mean, you are intentionally doing certain things to drive a certain type of culture, or you're not, in which case the gravity that we talked about will sort of suck it down to the worst possible place. So it's
and then the neatest thing will happen is a new person comes into your organization and they go, wow, what a great place this is. Just the feel here is so great. Or someone comes I go into Eric's house and I say, wow, this sounds great. Mine sounds like a tin can. You've really, really worked on this, and this is super impressive. It's nice because once in a while you get somebody, and it doesn't even mean that their organization was horrible or toxic, but when someone comes in and says, wow, we just didn't have this and I so appreciate it. What a great feeling. And then now you've got a new person who's a fan and is already in that place of appreciation and excitement, and your culture just probably got better.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing to see that improvement begets more improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, good stuff. Well, I appreciate you being on the show again, Jedd. It's already time. I mean, time flies. I feel like we could easily spend another hour on this stuff. So I appreciate you being here today. Really good stuff. And I appreciate the audience questions here as well. Thanks for joining from all the platforms that you've all joined here from today. So be sure to check us out every Tuesday, live stream, same time, same place, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, Facebook. And you'll see this interview reappear along with other related content in our next Transformation Ground Control podcast. It actually comes out a week from tomorrow, I think it is. So look either a week or 2 weeks out. You'll see this as part of a broader episode of my podcast that comes out every week. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. And Jedd, thank you for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for giving extra polish to the final product for my interview. I know it'll need that. Always a blast talking to you. I really appreciate it. Thanks to your audience as well.
Yeah, thank you, Jedd. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and a great rest of your week. And we will chat with you all soon. Take care.